Like I said, my name is Amber Melander, and we're going to talk about unplugged coding, especially in elementary school. And while this does gear mostly in K through second, I do teach K through fifth, and there are ways to upscale most of the activities that I'll show you. All right, let's see if I can get this to work. Sorry, I'm used to having dual monitors, and not having them is proving to be a little bit of an issue. It's not letting me advance my slides. All right, here we go. A little bit of backstory with how I started my love of coding. I came from a very, very small town. We were a corn town. We were farming. I lived in central Illinois, and my high school had one computer, even though most high schools had a ton. So we only had one computer in our whole school. It was an Apple IIe. We very rarely used it. I actually took a typing class on a typewriter. My school was behind the times. I was never really a tech person. It started for me, though, when my boys were a little bit older. I have an 11-year-old and a 14-year-old. And when they were about 7 and 4, their grandma made an app using code.org. Their grandma, of all people, made an app and had coded it. She went to her senior home and they had this whole class and she thought it was really cool. So she made this Star Wars app and sent it to my boys. Well, they decided that they wanted to do the same thing. So I started learning coding because they needed to learn how to do it. So I was learning to help them learn. And the more that I learned about coding and computer science, the more I realized there was a need for it, even in elementary school, especially in elementary school, because the younger we get things in kids' brains that this is something you can do, the more likely they are to grasp onto it. So this all started because I was a mom who knew very little and needed to know a little bit more because I wanted to help my boys out. So a little bit more about me. I began my career teaching in Illinois. I was a middle school math teacher. I taught 6th, 7th, and 8th grade math, and I looped with my students for 4 years. Eventually, though, my district actually shrunk, and I moved to elementary school. And then I worked as a curriculum director for the county that I was working in Upper Illinois. I was the math curriculum coach. After a little while working in Illinois, but living in Wisconsin, I needed to switch to Wisconsin to be on the same schedule as my kiddos. So I started to teach, and I was in Wisconsin, and I taught in a school that used Lego Education and Project Lead the Way. It was a very inner city school. It was, if you saw anything about the riots that happened recently in Kenosha, Wisconsin, my school was in the backyard of that. So I wasn't there at that time, but you can kind of get the feel for what my school was like. The kids were disengaged. The community was disengaged, and we were trying everything we could to get them engaged. So we had just adopted Lego Education and Project Lead the Way, which is a project-based program that started to dabble in some robotic solutions. And the more I taught that, the more I realized that technology and hands-on and showing kids things that were relevant to their life was really the way to teach them. Eventually, we ended up moving down to Georgia because my husband's job moved him, and I got the opportunity to have some faith put in me by my principal. She said, "We're going to CS for All in our whole county. Would you like to try teaching CS in elementary school?" And I said, absolutely. So now I teach CS in elementary school, and I also serve as our school's AI coach. So our school is in the AI cluster, meaning that the elementary, middle, and high school all teach aspects of AI in every single class that we have. And I coach AI in my building, so I help the teachers to learn how they can integrate AI and computer science within their classrooms. So that's a little bit about me and where I come from. And I will say I'm fairly new to computer science teaching in elementary school, only because I feel like true computer science teaching in elementary school is pretty new. We've done technology specials, we've done typing, we've done research on computers, but true computer science in the elementary level hasn't really taken off until recently. And I'm loving everything that I'm seeing. So why would you use unplugged coding? When kids came to I'm a specials teacher, so they come to me once every 5 weeks, along with music, art, PE, all of those things. And when they come in, they immediately think they're going to be on a computer. Well, my kindergarten, first, and second graders are not really on computers until December. And they are at first a little upset with me, like, why are we doing this? We're in computer science. Why aren't we on computers? Because I start everything in an unplugged way. So why would you do that? Because it teaches critical thinking skills, computational skills, and problem solving. I've always spoke to teachers and parents and let them know that coding and computer science isn't just about the technology, it's also a way of thinking. We think differently when we think in computer science. We really use those critical thinking skills and computational skills and problem solving, because if kids are going to go into a career in technology, they have to know how to think about a problem that doesn't even exist right now. They have to be able to think about problems quickly. We see how quickly technology evolves. So we have to teach them how to do that. So that's a really big part of Unplugged coding. It shows the hows and the why of coding before they get mired in the what to do. It's the how we do it and the why we do it. Each different part of coding that I teach in an unplugged way. And it helps us solidify vocabulary. In elementary school especially, the vocabulary words that go along with coding are so important so the kids can talk to one another and so that they can go across multiple coding platforms. I'm a strong believer that once they are on a computer, they should be seeing multiple different types of code. In elementary school, we primarily use drag and drop coding, whether it's through Scratch or code.org or Blockly-based coding. All of those things are drag and drop. But I like to show them a multitude of different languages to show the similarities with the vocabulary and the slight differences. And that even though they're different, we can still think about how to use them to do what we need them to do. That's a part of that problem solving piece. Because if we only ever teach them using something like Scratch, that's what they're going to assume coding is, and they're never going to know anything different. So I like to solidify that vocabulary that's going to appear throughout different platforms. It also allows students to think about concepts without the distractions of a screen, okay? So as soon as you put a kid on a screen, they are off and running, and sometimes running in the wrong direction. So I like them to really think through the concepts without the screen there. And it also allows me to have a conversation with them when they're on the computer and we have common language. Why are you doing this? Oh, because I need a loop. Well, why do you need a loop? And so they've got that language that we can talk back and forth about when they're showing me what their code is, rather than just them dragging and dropping and hoping to solve the puzzles that are on the screen. They're really thinking about the concepts before they're dragging and dropping things. So I'm going to go through just a few of our main ideas of coding. And I will tell you right now, I am not used to this type of platform. I am a very interactive teacher. Even when I'm teaching groups of other teachers, I'm very interactive. So it's going to be hard for me not to see faces, to see if, you're getting it, you're bored. Do I need to move on? Do I need to go slower? But I'm going to do the best I can. The first thing that I always teach my kids is sequencing. And I go back to this, even though kids have now had me, this will be their third year that they've had computer science. I still go back to sequencing. Some of the kids are like, we know this, Miss M, but they still love the activities. And it still solidifies that language with me that, okay, this is a sequence. This is what we're doing. All right, so when I come in, and I'm actually going to turn off my screen share if I can figure this out, because I'm going to show you this live. Wrong button. It's a little bit different seeing this live, so I want to show you. I usually will walk in, and I had to take a theater class when I was in college, and this is the one time I use my theater background. I usually will walk in and drop my book and let the pages scatter everywhere. So I've just taken a little book and I've cut out the pages so they scatter. And I pick them up in a haphazard way, and I just go, all right, we're going to read a book today. This book is called Arthur the Brave. Now, I purposefully put the pages back in the wrong order in order to, talk about sequencing. So then I'll start reading. What are you doing to Mom's good towel? Asked DW. Please call me Arthur the Brave, said Arthur. You're Arthur the silly, DW giggled. Not funny, said Arthur. That afternoon, Arthur took a walk. Bring on the bad guys, he said. Bring on the danger. Hang on, Arthur, called Binky and Buster. Buster climbed up and untangled Arthur's cape. Thanks, said Arthur. He felt like he couldn't do anything right. I'll show her, thought Arthur. But I need to think of something brave to do. I've got it, yelled Arthur. By this point, my kids are usually giving me a weird look, or some of them are raising their hand, or some of them are yelling out. You have to start at the beginning. You have to fix the pages. I'm hoping that they're starting to see that the story doesn't make sense because I'm doing it out of order. I used to be afraid of monsters when I was little, said Arthur. Then I learned a magic spell that got rid of them. Will you tell me, she asked. I'll never be like Bionic Bunny, thought Arthur that night. Just then he heard DW crying. Help, she cried. There are monsters under my bed. Arthur smiled and quietly tiptoed out of her room. All right, guys, this story isn't making sense. Why not? So at that point, I would have the kiddos turn and talk to each other about, why isn't this story making sense? What's wrong with it? You can do the same activity. I did it with my 5th graders, showing them something basic that they would do. So I came in and we did a whole exercise on how we would do a jumping jack. And I did the jumping jack out of order and not at the same time in unsequenced. So, and I just looked a fool. But they love that because they love when the teacher looks a fool. And I was hoping that they would realize that, okay, the order that we do things in is important. That gets them to realizing the vocabulary word before I give them the word. So that's something that I believe in too. A lot of times we like to just give them the word and tell them the definition. I like them to stumble on the definition of things or stumble on why it's important before I've actually even given them the word for it. And by this time, my 3rd graders, my 4th graders will start to know, okay, this is sequencing. And they will actually use that word when they're turning and talking. It's out of sequence. So they've started to solidify that vocabulary. That's fine. It's great review for your kids that already know it. It's awesome for the kids who are new to our schools that they see it. And it's just good reinforcement for everybody that we know, okay, this is a word that we're going to use in computer science. When we're talking about the order things go in, we're going to call it sequencing. All right, let's see if I can go back to sharing my screen. All right. So that is my opening activity, the book Arthur the Brave. You can use any book. I just used that one because it was at the Dollar Tree and I didn't feel bad about cutting it open. But you want to pick one where it starts to really not make sense as you go. Like the characters aren't doing things in order. There's people here that weren't there. The scenes aren't making sense. So it needs to be confusing purposefully. And then I'll define the word form. The sequence is the order of steps. And then I ask them, what are times when order is important? All right, so I'm going to give you a minute or so. If you want to drop it in the chat, what is a time when order is important? Let's see if I can get to my chat. Yeah, brushing your teeth, order is important. Nice. So the kids will come up with lots and lots of different examples of when order is important. When you're cooking, when you're brushing your teeth, when you're baking a cake, all of those are times when order is important. We need to do things in the right order. But are there times when order is not important? So I think it's good for kids to see examples and non-examples. It comes from my literacy background. That's how we used to teach vocabulary, way back in the day. We give examples and non-examples. So are there times when order is not important? And for that one, I would show them a book like this, Things That Are Soft. Nonfiction books, especially when it's not a book about history, we can read it out of order. I can tell you that kittens are soft, and then I can jump to the end and say that a blanket is soft, and then I can go back to the beginning and say feathers are soft. And it still makes sense because it doesn't have to go in order. There are times later when we go into coding where the order might not be as important. We're not going to study that today, but I want you to keep that in your brain. Sometimes order is important. That's when we need a sequence. Sometimes order is not important, like when we're reading a nonfiction book. So I give them those non-examples so that they know later on when I teach event-based coding, oh yeah, I remember Miss M talked about that a while ago. And then I can refer back to this example and talk about when things are not important to do in order. And then I have them think about coding. This is where having younger kids really comes in handy because I like to pull in examples that they would know that are relevant to them. Bringing in something relevant is really important. So if I'm thinking about video games, if you've ever played a game like Minecraft, when you walk into the video game, you can go anywhere you want, do anything you want. The sequence is not necessarily important. You don't have to do this first, then this, then that. But back in the day, I was an expert Mario player. And in Mario, you start at the beginning, you go all the way to the end of the level, you beat that level, you go on to level 2. For that, the sequence or the order is important. You can't go on to the next level until you beat the one before it. So even in our video games, we have sequence and ones where sequence is not as important. And then they have them go into an independent practice. I actually do this with my younger kiddos. We do it right on the Mimeo board. We don't have an interactive whiteboard, but we have a Mimeo, so they've got the magic pen that they can drag and drop things into the correct order using sequencing cards. For the older kids, I usually will give them something that has directions and some clue words like you would use in language arts, like then, next, last, finally. And I try to stick with things that they have background knowledge about. Have to be very careful about bias when it comes to that, because you will have kids who know how to do something and you assume every kid knows what to do for that, but they might not. So just be careful about bias. This, especially when you're looking at things like baking a cake. While you might bake cakes with your kids, not everybody has baked a cake before, so they might not actually know the steps. So they might not be able to put them in order because they don't know them. Now, something like brushing your teeth, hopefully we're safe in that one. They should all know how to brush their teeth. They've all done that. So just be careful about those bias pieces when it comes to the older kids with their independent practice, because when you get something that's multi-step, they have to have the background knowledge in order to complete the activity. All right, so I have them come up. They will drag and drop. This one is the second one in the list. This one actually proved to be really interesting last year. I had a little kindergartner, and I think he just liked to disagree. Love those kids because they make the best conversations. He decided that he wanted it to go empty popsicle stick, half full, full, while all the other kids had put it as full, half eaten, then empty. And right away, they were like, no, you can't do it that way. But I paused them, and we had a discussion about, why is it important that we listen to what he has to say? We'll call him Max. Why did Max put him in this order? And if none of the kids know, then I'll say, well, then we need to listen to Max and figure out why he put them in that order. Maybe it's important. Max, why don't you share your thinking with us? And Max was a very vocal kindergartner, very well-spoken. He was a lovely child. So he came up and he said, I thought about it like when I make a popsicle, like at first I have the empty sticks and then I pour in the juice. And then when I check them, they're kind of half done and then they're fully done. And I applaud that thinking. That I love that your brain thinks a different way from everybody else. And then you'll have some kids who'll say, yeah, but if they were half melted, or half frozen, they'd be liquidy. And so we take some ideas from everybody and we decide, okay, it probably is full, half eaten, then empty. But I like that Max was thinking a different way to see if there was a different solution about it. So it's kind of neat when you get those divergent ideas of what's happening in the pictures and you allow the kids to discuss their solutions. All right, before we go to the next one, just to check the chat because I can't do both at the same. So if you have any questions about sequencing, how to scale this up, because I do teach it to 5th grade, which they're not middle school yet, but they're close. So if you have any questions about scaling or this activity, you can throw them in the chat. I'll give you guys like 30, 45 seconds and I'll check that chat box. I did create these sequencing cards on my own. I will share after I'm done, I'll share the link for this Google presentation. So you're welcome to use it. These are ones that I came up with because there are a lot on the internet that you can find. And I actually have some resources at the end of the slideshow for other activities. I wanted to come up with one to share with you all that I had never seen before and that I had done with my kids. So there's lots of really great resources out there too. This is just kind of another one that you may want to use. Good question. All right. By the way, if you all are teachers and you remember teaching digitally, which we all probably do, and you're probably teaching on Zoom, this teaching on Hopin is like when none of the kids would turn on their cameras and you felt like you were just talking to a wall. It's a little like that. It's kind of strange. I'm getting used to it though. All right, let's move on to the next concept. So the next thing I teach my kids is loops. just as an aside, when we're looking at data, I do a vocabulary pre-test and a vocabulary post-test as part of my teacher evaluation. And every single child, except for 2 that were not there at the beginning of the year, got the word loops correct in my first grade. So I taught 170 some first graders, and all but 2 of them got the word loop. So this lesson and the subsequent lessons that we do with it must have hit home for some of them. So for loops, I am a big proponent of literature in the classroom. As you could tell with my Arthur book and then my things that are soft, this book is called, I have it backwards. It's called How to Code a Sandcastle. If you have not checked out this book before, it is awesome. It's a Girls Who Code book. They also have How to Code a Roller Coaster. Sorry, the title slipped my mind. How to Code a Roller Coaster. I like it because the main character is a girl and also is a girl of color. So it's nice to see that diversity represented. I'm going to go ahead and stop my screen share and read these pages. Now, when I'm doing loops, I don't read the entire book. I only read the pages that pertain to loops. Drive some of the kids crazy, especially my gifted learners who want to hear the entire story. So then I will give it to their classroom teacher and say, hey, can you just put this out? And they can read it at their own time. So that is kind of how I get around that, because time is of the essence in my classroom. I only get them for 50 minutes for a week at a time, and I only see them every 5 weeks. So I have to make the most of the time that I have with them. All right, a little backstory since I'm not reading the entire thing. This is about a girl named Pearl who's tried desperately all summer to build a sandcastle. And unfortunately, every time something goes wrong. So today, she's brought her trusty sidekick, Pascal, who's a robot, to help her build this sandcastle. We're jumping into the middle. Pearl has several small problems. This is small problem number 2, gathering up the sand. Now we'll need a huge pile of sand. It's very important to tell Pascal everything in the correct sequence. Ooh, we've done that word. And I do love this book because it does highlight vocabulary. And even though I'm not teaching sequence, they highlight it in here again. So it's nice to kind of point that out as we're going through. That means in the right order. 1, fill the pail with sand. 2, dump the sand in our spot. 3, pat the sand down. Great job, Pascal. Now let's do it again. Fill the pail, dump the sand, pat it down. And again, fill, dump, pat. This is getting boring. There must be a coding trick I can use. Aha, a loop. When you need to repeat something in code, you can use a loop. Pascal, loop through the sequence. Fill the pail with sand, dump the sand on our spot, pat the sand down. And I love that it's in a circle. The illustrator was right on the money because a loop keeps going around and around in a circle. So I love that. Then on the next page, our illustrator took over, and you can see Pascal is just doing those steps over and over again. And Pearl's taking a little break, just chilling with her puppy. This still might take a while. I'm going to relax while you work. Hey, it sounds like me. I like to relax while the robot's working. And then we have another great picture by that illustrator showing our loop going in a circle. Dig, dump, pat. Dig, dump, pat. And now, if I'm teaching my younger kiddos who we don't talk about loops and how they end. We only really talk about just general loops. I'll stop there. For my older kids, I will point to this page and say, uh-oh, I think that's big enough. Time for a break, Pascal. I'll say, what did Pearl forget to do? When we have a loop, we not only have to tell the robot or the computer program what to do, what else do we need to tell it? And they should know by that point, because they've had me for long enough, that we have to tell it when to stop as well. So it's nice that I can stop short of that part and bring that in later, or I can bring that in with my older kiddos. Okay, so that is how to code a sandcastle. So I'll start with literature, and then I'll move on from there for an activity for them to do. All right, let's go back to our screen share. I think I'm getting the hang of this. I shouldn't say that because then it's going to stop working. All right, and I actually snipped some of the pictures. So if you are using this within a classroom context and you don't have the book and you need that part of it, it's snipped into the slideshow. But I highly recommend buying the book. It's a great organization to support and a great book to have the entire book of. Okay. So then we'll define a loop as repeating a set of steps. And then I'll ask the kids, and I'm going to ask you, what are some things that you know of outside of the computer world, just in the real world, that loop? What can you think of that loops? And I'll give you like 30 seconds to put something in the chat. What do you think? What are some things that loop? And this is where I would have the kids turn and talk. If they're stuck, and sometimes they'll get stuck on this one, I'll start to do things around the room that kind of loop, like stapling a set of papers. So I'll have a set of papers on my desk and I'll start stapling one after the other while they're trying to think of something, so that if they're looking at me, kind of giving them that visual cue of something that can loop. Yeah, brushing your teeth is a maybe because you're going up and down, side to side. Although I tell my kids when they're brushing their teeth, they shouldn't be doing the same motions over and over again. So that's a maybe. It could be though, depending on how you brush your teeth. And I know I've seen a looping exercise online. I think it's from, I want to say CS and SF, that talks about brushing your teeth, or it might be the Hello Ruby books, has something about brushing your teeth. Again, it just depends on which part is a loop. And that can actually get into something that is a little different, talking about how some of the code can loop and some of it cannot. So you could use the idea of brushing your teeth to talk just about a loop, or about how one segment of code can be looped. Like we keep going up and down a certain number of times, but then we have to also rinse out our mouth and spit and all that stuff. So brushing your teeth can actually lead to more of things. I love the idea of line dancing. And if you've never seen, there are some great dancing loops online that I've just YouTube videos of, and then we do some dancing of loops, which is really fun. So if you've never seen those, they're very fun. Good. Bouncing, dribbling a ball, all of those things can be done in a loop. Good. So I have the kids turn and talk. They give an idea. Oops, sorry. I did not mean to hit that. And that is, I like them to share out their ideas together because they're going to go to the next step, which is independent practice. But before they go to that, I'll ask them, why would you want to use a loop? Now, if they're struggling with that, I will casually flip to the page in the book where Pearl's face looks really bored as she says, this is getting really boring, as she has to keep repeating the command over and over again. Then I'll zoom in on that. Hopefully they will get that. It takes a long time if you have to keep repeating the commands over and over again. Also, one of the reasons that we use a loop is for efficiency. We know that the more lines of code that we write, the slower the program runs. So if we can put them in a loop, it will help to speed up our program. By the way, if you have never seen it, because I know some of you teach older kids, Flowcabulary has an amazing song about loops where this kid is building a burrito and then he has to build 100 burritos. It's called, I can't think of the name of the exact song, but it's from Flowcabulary. If you just look up Flowcabulary loops, it's a great little song that my 5th graders love and will sing over and over again when they come into my room. A way to kind of up the level if you're afraid that this is too primary for your kiddos. So then they go into their independent practice, which is drawing a loop. I'll give them the example. They know that I'm a runner. We talk about running a lot because it's a way that I connect with them. It's something that I do all the time. And so then I'll tell them this is the loop of my running sequence. But if I only put that guy is going to be running forever and ever. And hopefully they get the point that we also need to put a number of times that we need to loop this. So for example, times 100, which by the way, the kids think is a ginormous number. But 100 steps is not actually all that far. It just makes me laugh when the kindergartners are like, he's going really far. He is not. And then I send them off to practice where they're drawing their own loops and we come back and share out their artwork. All right, that is how I start out teaching loops. I'll give you guys about 30 seconds or so if you've got any questions you want to put in the chat. And I will put that, I don't think I included Flowcabulary in my resource list, so I'll put that for you. Any questions about loops? I also like to do some cross-curricular things. So the music teacher and I will jokingly argue in the hallway about, it's called a repeat. No, it's called a loop. No, it's a repeat. No, it's a loop. So we have this like ongoing banter about whether it's a loop or whether it's a repeat. So connecting it cross-curricular helps too. And then the kids will take a side and want to call it one thing. And then one kid in my CS class will say, oh, we're going to put it in a repeat. And then we all laugh and I correct them. And it's this ongoing banter that we have going on, whether it's a repeat like it is in music or a loop like it is in computer science. But it does help it to stick in their brain because they keep hearing that word over and over again, and they can make that cross connection. And anytime we have a cross connection in our brain, we know that kids remember things more. Yeah, I do use the vocabulary of repeat to help them understand. A loop is when we repeat something over and over again. In music, you call it a repeat. In computer science, we call it a loop. So yeah, I connect those two together. Yep, absolutely. Whatever is going to help them remember. And then we just use that. And the kids will say, as they're coding, and I'm talking to them about their code, some of them will say a repeat. And I'll say, okay, I like that you're repeating something, but what do we call that in CS? And then hopefully they'll remember that we call it a loop. So I don't tell them they're wrong. I just correct them to using the best terminology possible because they're not technically wrong. We just want them to be using the terminology that works for us. All right, my friends, on to the last term. And by the way, these would each be at least one class session for me. Sometimes they end up, what I'll usually do is I'll teach it in a class session, and then the next session, they'll get to practice it in a hands-on way on the computer if they're ready to be plugged in. Or they may practice it using something like a bot. BBots are great for sequences, especially for your little ones, and it's not a screen, but it's still very engaging. So I usually will have them do it unplugged completely and then kind of plugged using either a robot or an iPad, or if I'm feeling really brave with my kindergartners, letting them go on the computer to do something on there. In our county, the kids have to log in using a password. That's why I'm saying, like with kindergartners, if I'm lucky, because they have a very hard time getting on the computers for a long time. All right, so then they go draw a simple loop. And I do give them some ideas. They've talked about ideas of things that have loops, but just in case they're stuck, I don't want them stuck thinking of an idea. I want them actually practicing drawing it. So I give them some examples. All right, our last terminology is debugging. This is one of the ones as well that a lot of the kids remember. And I have some teachers that will actually use it in the classroom now. Our school, because we are in the AI cluster, we try to incorporate computer science vocabulary across other areas. So in our SEL, our social emotional learning lessons, we talk about debugging an issue that you have with a friend. So that's something that we use that term again and again. So if they've just had an argument on the playground, the teacher will bring the two kiddos together and say, let's debug it, which means let's fix that problem and reset. So we've started using this terminology in other areas of our building. It's great for me because I have amazing support from my colleagues. I know not everybody does, but if you've got somebody that can use it, that's a great way to do it. So I'll start out, I don't tell them the term. I'll just say, what is it called when you do something that is not right? Okay. And I have them turn and talk and see how many different words you and your partner can come up with. So go ahead and put into the chat, what is it called when you do something that is not right? Wrong, good. What else? A mistake, oops, all of those things. And I start to list them on the board. The reason is sometimes my kids want to push back, like, well, why do we have to learn another word? We could just call it wrong or an error, or, they'll give other words that we could call it. And I'll say, you're right. But every single job has its own terms that they use. So we're going to use the term in computer science. We call a mistake a bug. So we're going to call it a bug. And if you want to give the story of what's behind that, if you've never heard the story, there was actually a bug in the computer, and that had caused it to crash. And that's where the term came from. When they took apart the computer, there was actually a dead bug inside of it. That's where that term came from, in case you never knew. A little bit of trivia for you. And when we fix that mistake, it is called debugging. Debugging has 3 steps, and then we dance it out. So along with thinking that literacy is very important, I think that learning in every single format is important. So a lot of kids get things ingrained in their brain better if they're doing kinesthetic learning. So they're learning with their body. And I will see kids actually doing these hand motions all the time when we're actually coding on a computer. I will see a kid use my hand motions that I've taught them. And I dance it out for a lot of different things. It's very high energy in my room. I'm very exhausted at the end of the day. So here are our moves for debugging. The 3 steps, and each one has a move. Find the bug. So you're going to do a spyglass hand and put it up to your eyeball. So we're going to find the bug. Fix the bug. And we do a little eraser with our hands. And then test the code. Press play. That's the step that a lot of kids will forget about, is retesting their code. So I go into a little bit of detail. We always test the code because we might have fixed the bug correctly, but there might be another one hiding in there. Or maybe we fixed the bug, but that caused another problem. So we always want to test the code to make sure it does what we want it to do when we're all done debugging. And then I have all the kiddos stand up and we dance it out. All right, let's do our 3-step dance. We're going to find the bug, fix the bug, and test the code. And if y'all were live, I would make you stand up and dance it out with me. But since you're on the screen and I can't see you, you get to just sit and watch me do it a little bit. Okay. So I recommend, if you can, and some of the kids will think it's overly goofy, but in an era of TikTok, I actually had a 5th grader create a TikTok video about debugging, and she did it with her friends at indoor recess and then showed it to me later. I don't recommend they use TikTok at school, but it just cracked me up that at recess, they were doing the debugging dance for TikTok. So they found the bug, fixed the bug, and test the code. And then they had this giant bug appear on the screen. So they like goofy little things even when they're a little bit older. And then I pull in some literature. Bugs and Errors with Wreck-It Ralph. Now, these Disney books are so engaging for the little ones. I don't know if the older ones would find them as interesting, but again, it is just a little bit of novelty. It's a whole series called Disney Coding Adventures. So this one is Bugs and Errors with Wreck-It Ralph. There's also Looping with Finding Dory. There's Conditional Statements with The Incredibles. That one is great for the older kids. So these books are great just to pull a page or 2 out of if you have the budget and can get them, or even get a digital copy off of Amazon. I know I always choose later shipping so that I have free digital credits on Amazon so I can download books later. This is the page that I took a snippet of where we would practice debugging. So I would read it to them, and I'm actually going to read it out of the physical book because that is way too small for me to read on the screen. The nice Landers are having a party. Ralph wants something to eat. Help him move across the room to the cake shaped like a building. Now, I go ahead and do this part with them without reading all of the directions on purpose. So that says, look at the map on the next page, pretend to be Ralph and run or start this algorithm. So I take my giant pointer or my finger and I point out, okay, we go over 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I wish they had used a loop because that would have been easier to read, and then up. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and up. Wait a minute. I thought we were supposed to be debugging. I don't see a bug. He gets from the start to the end. Oh, you know what? I know your teacher always says read all the directions. I better read this part down at the bottom, because while the code gets him from the beginning to the end, maybe there's something else that the code needs to do. Let's read that part at the bottom. Did you bump into people? Oh, yeah, we did. If so, the algorithm has bugs. Decompose the problem. That means think about the steps that will get Ralph to the cake. Then write a new algorithm with arrows on your paper. Avoid bumping into people or the couch. Oh, okay. So while it got him there, that wasn't the only purpose of our code. Our code needed to get him there without him running over people. And then I would have kids come up and tell me, okay, what could we do in order to get Ralph to the end without going through the people? And what's great about this one, and why I do it full class rather than having them do it on their own, is there are multiple correct algorithms. So he could go over, up, over. He could go up, over, you will have a kid who will inevitably go down, over, up, over. And then we talk about why that's not the best choice, because we want to do it in the least amount of steps as the most efficient code. But it's nice to have multiple kids come up and show multiple ways to do it that are still the same number of steps. So that's debugging with Wreck-It Ralph. And then I send them off to work on their own. And they are doing this piece for independent practice. It's simple debugging. For the littler ones, I have them cut it out and actually glue the correct arrow over the bug. So the bug goes away and they glue the arrow that's supposed to go there where it goes. So that's what I do for my littler ones. So if they're looking at the start, I always have them run the code first. So they have to try it and see if it works. I do another activity that's unplugged where some of them are actually correct and some of them are not, and they have to sort them out into correct and incorrect, so that, or ones with a bug, ones without a bug, so that they can see that not every single code has a bug, because otherwise we run into that problem that sometimes math teachers do. Like if they know they're adding, they don't even have to understand the problem. They're just going to add every time. Well, if they know we're debugging, they're just going to automatically debug every time. But I want them to actually think about the code. So we do that activity usually first, where they're sorting things into has a bug, does not have a bug. Okay, so this one we're going to move up, move right, move down. Where's the mistake? And they'll figure out it's move down, and instead we need to put a move right. So they've got these little sheets that they'll work on. And then for my older kids, we make it a little bit more complicated. I've created these. They have danger spots in them. The code is a little bit longer. And then I actually have some that are even longer than that. And then, And then the next day, like I said, after we've done debugging, I have some code written for BBots that they run the BBot with the exact code that they're given, and it doesn't get them to the finish line. And then they have to rewrite the code and debug it so that it gets them to the finish line. And I have several different BBot mats set out throughout the room, and they get like 5 minutes at each station. And some of them are correct. So they'll have to say on their little worksheet where they're recording that this one there were no bugs. All right, any questions about debugging? All right, and debugging is by far one of their favorite things to do, especially when it comes to my code. So sometimes when I'm showing them an example of how to use something on like code.org, I will make a mistake, not even on purpose, and they will debug me. So they'll find where my mistakes are and they'll fix them for me. So they're great at debugging. They like to be able to find mistakes, especially when it's a teacher's mistake that has been made. They love to find those. All right. I define debugging for them, and then later in other sessions, they'll define vocabulary for me. One of their favorite games that I play, because I am a specials teacher, which means that sometimes teachers are going to the bathroom and they're a minute or two late to get their class, or they were held over in a meeting. I always have what I call some back pocket activities, which are like, we're in line, the teacher's not here yet, what do we do? Or this activity ended 5 minutes earlier than I anticipated, what do we do now? One of my back pocket activities is just to define the vocabulary, and any kid that can get it right, I give them a Tootsie Roll or something simple and easy like that. And I do have these words on a word wall in the back of my room. And the back of my room, my word wall is both visual and has the actual definition written out in words, because I do teach kindergarten and we start teaching this vocabulary in kindergarten. We don't actually expect them to have it mastered until the end of second grade, but they've heard it now for 2 years. Most of them can at least say it. They can't necessarily spell it. They can't necessarily read it, but they can at least say it when we're talking about code. And then by the end of second grade, they should have it mastered. Sequencing, looping, debugging, conditionals is another one that we add in second grade that they don't have to master until 5th grade. So we've got different vocabulary stops along the way. All right, so those additional resources that I was telling you about, and again, I'll share this slideshow with you. There are lots of great unplugged resources. And I know that sometimes it's overwhelming because there's resources here, there, and everywhere. I take the best from everywhere. That's kind of how I've always taught. I think that there are great things out there, and why reinvent them if they're already great, but don't use it if it's not great. Don't use an entire curriculum just because you like one or two activities. Pick the ones that you really enjoy. So code.org has a whole unplugged curriculum. I picked the ones that match my standards. I have particular standards that I have to teach in different grade levels, so I choose the ones that match each grade level, and I use them just for that grade. Oop, I did not mean to go to that website. Sorry, my screen just flashed differently from yours. Let me see if I can get back to it. There it goes. I accidentally clicked the link, so my screen went crazy. Codeable. If you've never used Codeable before, it is a free coding program. It is non-language based, so it is symbols, so it's arrows. So it's not great for your older kids, but it's great for your younger kids. And it does teach some really great ideas like conditionals and those types of things in a different coding language. Codables I love because it is very different from the languages that we learn in Scratch and code.org, but it still does the same things. In something like code.org, when you want a character to move over 4 spaces, you have to put 4 over arrows. In Codeable, it moves over until it hits a wall. So it's just telling them, okay, this coding language works a little bit differently. And I like exposing them to that because they need to see that different languages work differently. They do also have this whole unplugged curriculum as well. So the part where I'm talking about it's a little ball and it rolls until it hits a wall, that's the actual just Codeable website, which is free. And it has lots of great coding things in it. And it does actually move into text-based coding later. I haven't used that part yet because I only teach up to 5th grade, but I believe it uses JavaScript when they get a little bit older and have some things under their belt. So Codeable is a great one if you've never checked it out. CS Unplugged. These activities are less worksheet-based and more actual hands-on, moving around, doing things with your body. Code.org and Codables are both more worksheet-based. CS Unplugged is great for little ones that need to move and need to get up and experience and do things in order to understand them more. And the last one is a curriculum that I look at a lot called CS and FS and SF, so Computer Science in San Francisco. They have an entire curriculum that uses Scratch quite a bit, but the red unit, which is their first unit, is all unplugged. So that is meant to be used by younger kids, but I found that some of their activities actually work really well for older kids as well. All right, I know I'm a little early because I'm a fast talker and it's hard when I don't see reactions. But if y'all have any questions, I can answer those now. And I'm also going to share my presentation. It is a Google presentation, so if you don't have a Google Drive, I don't know that I'll be able to share it with you, but hopefully everyone's got a Google Drive that they can use. And I'm exiting out of that. If you have any questions, go ahead and pop them in, and I'm going to share this link with you all. All right, so if you want to try that link just to make sure it worked, sometimes I have issues with sharing Google correctly. I think I showed that one correctly though. I'm glad to hear that even in the middle school, going unplugged is great, especially like I helped to lead some of the PD on computer science in elementary school in our county. And I talked with them like, if they're in 5th grade and this is the first time that they have had computer science, or if they're in 6th grade and this is the first time they've had computer science, you're going to need to go back a ways. And that is perfectly fine. We want to meet them where they are and then push them forward. But what we don't want to do, what we have to absolutely avoid, is for a child to sit in your room and feel like this is a complete foreign language that they can never get. So sometimes if our standards are way up here, but the kids are down here and we only teach this, especially in computer science, they're going to bolt, because computer science can seem scary anyways, because it's all computers and the insides and it can be scary for them anyways. So if we're only here and we're not realizing those kids are lost, they're going to be like, it's not for me. And then we're going to lose them completely. So as much as you can to make them feel comfortable with that language and to feel successful as coders, especially in the beginning of the year, and then push them with those challenges. Just realize that your kids are coming in at multiple levels, especially my middle school teaching friends. Some elementary schools might have great computer science teachers. Some might not. And that's just the reality of where we are. So we have to kind of be at that reality and meet the kids where they are and keep them going forward, feeling successful. And if you all have any questions for me, especially if you're in Gwinnett, you can find me and send me an email, and I am happy to answer it. I do have a list of books. I've been asked that question several times about my books that I have, because I have many, many books that I use. Let me go to my Google Drive and Google it right now, and I will pop the list in. Now, this is a list that I used at the end of the year to order books that I did not have, but I've included some notes about other books that go along with them that are good too. So this is by no means the be all and end all list. And it's amazing because computer science books are currently being written by the droves. And actually what I usually do is I check them out from the public library first, see if they're any good, read them to a class, and then I put them on my list. And I have an ongoing list in my Keep Notes on my cell phone. And my principal every once in a while will say, hey, I've got some money. What books do you need? And I'll send her the list. Or my librarian will say, hey, what CS books can I order for the library? Like I said, I have a very supportive staff, so I've gotten lucky that way. But use your public library, because some of the computer science books, not to be a hater, are clunky. They don't flow very well because they're more computer science people writing them than actual authors, which is great because the terminology is right, just the books are a little bit clunky. These are ones that I found are highly engaging to the kids. They're well written, and they cover concepts in a way that they can understand. All right, y'all.